Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice Podcast. The Heart of Hospice Podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice Podcast is being sponsored by bkbooks.com. Barbara Carnes and her team at BK Books have created the Approaching Death Support Kit to help educate and support families with clarity and compassion. This new bundle is a practical, ready-to-use resource for the bedside and includes many of Barbara's most trusted booklets. For more information, visit bkbooks.com or see the show notes for the link to bkbooks.com.
End-of-life option advocate Dan Diaz is my guest today, sharing the story of his wife, Brittany Maynard, and her pursuit of a good death. Dan Diaz advocates for expanding the availability of end-of-life options for folks who are terminally ill. He is the husband of Brittany Maynard, the 29-year-old woman who died in November of 2014 from a brain tumor. In order for Brittany to secure the option of a gentle dying process, Dan and Brittany moved from California to Oregon. At the time of Brittany's death, there were only 4 states in the United States that had the option of medical aid in dying. As we're recording this in March of 2025, there are now 11 states that have that law. Dan's efforts have been instrumental in securing the passage of legislation in California, Colorado, New Mexico, the D.C. area, and New Jersey, and he continues his work across the country, keeping the promise he made to Brittany. Dan believes that experiencing a good death is merely an extension of having lived a good life, and a terminal disease should never take that away from an individual. You can check out his website, thebrittanyfund.org, and it's thebrittany, BRITTANY, fund.org. In our conversation today, you're going to hear Dan provide some details about Brittany's story, how she was diagnosed, and how she took control of her end-of-life journey. He talked about the change in Brittany's outlook once she received the prescription that she would use to end her life, utilizing the medical aid in dying laws, death with dignity laws, as it's called in Oregon. Brittany's decision created a media storm when she announced her decision. Dan says they were unprepared for the overwhelming attention they received from the media. But he says that throughout this whole experience, he never doubted that Brittany's decision to utilize MAID was the right one. Dan is still keeping his promise to Brittany by advocating for medical aid in dying laws in many state legislatures. So this is a fantastic conversation. Hearing his story, hearing her story is so powerful. There's a lot to learn. It's so wonderful to have you here on the show. Thanks for talking with me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. We're going to have a great conversation. There's a lot to learn in your story, and I can't wait to get to it. But I want to start with a question just to get to know you a little bit. I do this with all my guests, and recently we've been focusing on advanced care planning because that's a conversation that flows through all of hospice and all of end-of-life care. So I want to ask you if you would share one of your end-of-life wishes with me and my listeners.
Well, since you mentioned advanced or kind of ending, I would say that's also a big part of the message when I'm speaking with either legislators or palliative care conferences, or even just a Rotary Club or at universities, or even I was at a high school a few weeks ago, is getting together your advanced healthcare directive, putting together the forms that you need. It truly is a gift for your family that, hey, what does Uncle Frank know? It's like, well, you just look, it's like, here it is, it's done. And it just takes the pressure off, and it allows the family to just focus on that patient, not having to be concerned, okay, if something goes sideways and we're having to make decisions, and then you're guessing, and then there's friction between family members and all that. So in that regard, that is one wish that I would hope more people would get those documents. As uncomfortable as a conversation as it might seem, get those documents in line for each and every family member. Do it together, and then that's it. You don't have to worry about those things, and it does make such a big difference at end of life. Just the whole experience that the family and the patient goes through, if all of those things have been discussed and settled.
Yeah, it's a game changer. It truly is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get to know your story, you and Brittany. It's really Brittany's story, as you so often say. I've heard you say in interviews that people don't know your name, but they definitely know who Brittany was. So tell me about Brittany and your journey together with her.
Sure. So Brittany and I, well, going back, we met in 2007. We were dating lived in Northern California. She graduated from UC Berkeley, and we both lived in Oakland. And we were a couple pretty much from after our first couple of dates. We lived in San Clemente in San Diego together. And in 2012, we were married. We bought a house together. We started settling into our lives with one another. Unfortunately, just after getting married, so this is now in 2013, Brittany started having headaches. Those headaches would wake her up in the middle of the night. She'd start throwing up, be unable to go back to sleep. Those headaches, she obviously sought medical professionals. She saw this specialist, and he said that she was probably having migraines. They did not do a CT scan or anything, because then they would have discovered the real source of all those headaches and the symptoms was a massive brain tumor. So for that year, the rest of 2013, the headaches, those episodes would kind of come and go, but it was at the end of that year, they were getting really bad. We were in wine country, and this was actually New Year's Eve. We were in Healdsburg, which is just outside of Sonoma. And we were walking back from lunch, getting ready for that night's, or the festivities that night. We had dinner and, drinks and everything planned. But as we're coming back from lunch, Brittany starts throwing up. The pressure, the pain is just way too intense. And so we end up in the emergency room. They did a CT scan. We were later that night at 1 a.m. We're transferred to another hospital because they needed to get an MRI. The first hospital didn't have that equipment. Anyhow, that was the first day, basically New Year's Day, 2014. that we discovered that tumor. And 10 days later, Brittany had brain surgery at UCSF Medical Center. 8-hour surgery. They were able to remove about 35%, 40% of the tumor. There's obviously parts of the brain that you cannot send a scalpel. You cannot start scooping out parts of the brain. It's far too delicate and sensitive. So after that surgery, they told Brittany that she had 3 years, maybe 5 years to live. Keep in mind, she's 29 years old receiving this news. And then about a month and a half, 2 months later, at the follow-up MRI, after that surgery, the tumor showed signs that it had changed that change was growing aggressively now, indicative of a glioblastoma multiforme. So that's the most aggressive type of brain cancer. And it was then that they told Brittany that based off of this trajectory, this thing, with how aggressive it's growing, they said, you have 6 months. And so with that news, Brittany said, well, we will continue to fight. That's what you do when you have cancer. But Brittany said that we would wage that battle against this horrific disease. Oregon, because at that time, Oregon did have their death with dignity law. California at that time did not. There were 4 states at that time. It was Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and Montana. So we packed up half of our home here in California into a moving truck. Brittany had to find a house for us to rent on Craigslist. We said goodbye to our friends and family. We drive 600 miles north into this new house that we have to set up, and Brittany has to find a new medical team. It was crazy, this odyssey that we had to go through. And we're doing this simply so Brittany could ensure that her dying process could be gentle. Instead of, if that brain tumor, it's to run its course, she's already dealing with pain that not even morphine could alleviate. She's on Dilaudid. That's 4 times stronger than morphine, right? So she's on some hefty doses of Dilaudid, Keppra for the seizure, dexamethasone for the brain swelling. Some of your audience, if they work in this field, they're well familiar with those medications. I mean, at one point she had 13 medications in her purse that she's carrying around with her. So we're doing everything we can to extend her life. Researching every clinical trial, doing everything we can to save her. But Brittany was, very eyes wide open of the fact that left to run its course, that brain tumor would essentially torture her to death. The nausea, the vomiting, that started getting worse. By the last few months, she was experiencing seizures. It was getting bad, and that's how that particular disease, that brain tumor, would end her life. She would essentially die as a suffering mass, stuck in bed with tubes coming out of her. And Brittany said, hell no. Brittany, she refused to allow the brain tumor to be in the driver's seat, to allow a disease to dictate how much suffering she might have to endure during her last few days on this green earth, which, logically, obviously after going through this experience, who amongst us would allow? It's like, I'm just going to roll the dice and take my chances of what cancer is going to do to me. Modern medicine, we have come way too far, and all the wonderful advances that have been made in keeping us alive, keeping us healthy, extending our lives. But in Brittany's, from her perspective, she was saying, well, shouldn't we also use just a little bit of all that wonderful experience and technology? In this case, it's a simple medication. Shouldn't we use some of that medical know-how just to allow this patient to experience a gentle death? And so, yeah, we moved to Oregon. She applied for, qualified for, received that medication. That was in May of 2014. That medication, we secured it, put it in the cupboard, and she was able to focus on living life. She was able to truly do the things that she wanted that were important to her, and not be so terrified of what her final few days might be like, because she had now addressed that. She had taken back that control from the disease. And when you're battling a terminal disease like that, when you're at end of life, just knowing that you have that little bit of control, that's huge. That means so much to that patient. And so right there, it provides an enormous amount of relief. So that is Brittany's story. And so the reason that I continue advocating, the promise I made to Brittany was that I would help pass legislation in more states so that nobody would ever have to do what we did of leaving your home after you've been told that you have 6 months to live. So we are now up to 11 states that has authorized medical aid and dying. California was the first one that passed just 2 months after Brittany died. I had to move everything back down to our home in California. We had Brittany's memorial service, and it was January of 2015 that we introduced our legislation here in California, and the governor signed that bill just 9 months later.
There's a lot to unpack, and I want to back up because
Sure.
Her story, your story, is so amazing. Dan, the concept of medical aid in dying as an option for Brittany, how did she get a hold of that information? Did somebody on her healthcare team say, hey, if you're interested in this, there are 4 states that have a death with dignity law, some sort of right to die law on the books? How did she find out about it?
So oddly, it was something that when she was an undergrad at Berkeley, it was a conversation. I forget if it was a sociology class but it was a topic that was brought up in that class. So she knew about it. I didn't. And, back when I was in college, years before she was, in the summer months, I was a lifeguard. I was an EMT. So as far as a certain amount of medical training, I had some. And so when Brittany received that diagnosis, this was even before she had surgery. So we discovered the tumor January 1st. She had surgery January 10th. It was probably January 3rd or 4th where we were having these conversations that Brittany brought this up. She says, no, Dan, it's different. It's death with dignity. Oregon has it. We don't. And it allows a person to, you receive this medication, and if modern medicine can't keep you from suffering, then you have this option. And so then obviously I'm looking into it and researching it myself. So yeah, that's how she knew about it, is that it was part of a class that she took when she was an undergrad.
Interesting. I find it interesting that nobody on her healthcare team suggested it to her.
Well, but there you go. And that was something then that Brittany almost took it upon herself. She would bring it up to the nurses, to the doctors on her medical team. And this alludes to what we were talking about earlier, Helen, that they knew nothing about this. But if you think through it, most of them probably did their residency in California, if that's where they're practicing.
Right.
So they really have no need to know that. I mean, obviously, you would like to think that they receive kind of a full breadth of training and their education, but a law that exists in Oregon and Washington, it's like, well, you're never going to do, you don't have that right to do that here. Their curriculum is jam-packed, and so they don't spend any time on that.
Right.
So when Brittany would mention it to all the nurses and doctors from that point forward, many of them would kind of lean forward and say, tell me about this option. No, I've never heard about that.
Yeah, she was educating them rather than the other way around.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't even teach in medical school and nursing schools about death and dying to any extent, about
Right.
end of life care. So I guess it's really no surprise there. So I want to talk about something that you mentioned about Brittany receiving her medications. She didn't get those medications or the medication a few days before she decided to take them. She had them for a long time, several months, I think.
Yes.
And in other interviews, you've talked about some changes that you saw in Brittany after she got the medication and had it in the cabinet in the house. What was different about her? What changed in her mindset and her behaviors?
It was that just total sense of relief. Really, in a word, to describe it is fear. That fear went away. When we were in California, and a simple look on the internet kind of will highlight what a person with a brain tumor might experience. As I mentioned, pain where morphine's not able to really alleviate that. She always had this pressure, this pain at the base of her skull. Couldn't sleep for days on end. But what's coming for her next, as the tumor grows and puts pressure on different parts of the brain, that she could lose her eyesight, presses on the optic nerve, whatever, now she's blind. If she suffers a stroke, and it's not uncommon, especially for a tumor that size, depending on what part of the brain is damaged from that stroke due to the lack of oxygen during that stroke, now she's partially or completely paralyzed. So looking that up, personality changes where 1 minute she's herself, and then all of a sudden she's just agitated, cruel, violent. Those things happen. And Brittany and I also had the firsthand experience. Each of us had a friend who their parent died. One was a stage 4 brain tumor, and the other was a grade 3. And their dying process was not easy. So just based off of all the information that we had, it's one of those that her end of life was not going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a little Hallmark movie where, the person's there, the patient's in bed, there's soft music playing, and then they just kind of close their eyes and they're dead. I wish that were true. And by the way, I want to be clear on this. Hospice and palliative care are wonderful fields of medicine where those truly are the superheroes of end of life care, because the individuals that are doing this work, that are showing up, they're changing adult diapers, they're doing all kinds of things for their patients, and truly care about that experience that they're going through. Death and dying, it's just a part of life and living. We shouldn't be so scared to talk about it. But for Brittany, the idea that she would have to endure any of that, of those horrific symptoms that our friend's parents went through, as soon as she received that medication, that fear vanished. That she knew that, okay, she is now in possession of something that can override the disease. So her outlook on life and just the activities, whatever we had planned, I'd say she was able to more confidently live the time that she had left. And she could, and even that, when a person qualifies and has that medication, I've seen this play out several times where they are more aggressive with the treatment options they might pursue. Because as you are probably well aware, sometimes it's not the disease, especially when we're talking about cancer, it's not the disease that may produce horrific symptoms, it's the treatment. If you've been through radiation and chemotherapy, that patient feels horrible. Many times after those sessions, they have to dial up or down, the dosing and everything. And there can be some pretty brutal side effects. And so I've seen where patients, when they have qualified for and have the medication, that they're saying, you know what, I'm willing to do this other thing and let's see. because again, knowing, all right, if that completely depletes their immune system, if all of a sudden there's other complications that show up, it's like they were willing to take the chance and pursue that, knowing that if somehow things didn't work out as planned, and maybe they're in a slightly worse position, they're still thinking it's like, it's okay. I have medical aid dying, so I know I won't suffer, beyond what they're willing to tolerate. So it is fascinating how the many different facets of this plays out. But in a word, it would just be that it's relief for that patient, peace of mind for that patient, and no longer having to feel terrified of what their dying process might be like. And Brittany certainly experienced that. As soon as we got to Oregon, as soon as she received that medication, her outlook on everything changed.
We're going to break for just a minute. This isn't the end of the episode. There's more to come, so stay connected.
The sponsor for this episode is bkbooks.com. When someone you love is dying, the journey can feel overwhelming. What do? What should you expect? How can you help? Barbara Carnes, RN and end-of-life educator and hospice pioneer, created the Approaching Death Support Kit to bring clarity and practical guidance to the bedside.
Hi, this is Helen, host of the Heart of Hospice Podcast. As a hospice nurse, educating the family has always been a top priority for me. The Approaching Death Support Kit from BK Books provides families and caregivers with clear, practical guidance to help them navigate the end-of-life journey with confidence and compassion.
The bundle includes many of Barbara's most trusted booklets, Gone From My Sight, By Your Side, The 11th Hour, Pain at End of Life, and her newest title, Always Offer, Never Force. Whether you're a nurse, social worker, chaplain, or end-of-life doula, this kit supports your work. And for family caregivers listening, it offers gentle, trustworthy guidance to help you care for someone at home and feel more prepared for what's ahead. BK Books offers quantity discounts for teams, agencies, and families, so visit bkbooks.com to explore the Approaching Death Support Kit. See the show notes for this episode for a link to bkbooks.com.
So I want to talk about the media storm that this created. So Brittany made a video that went out and got pushed out where there were a lot of people that saw it. You guys were featured on People's website. And I mean, it just blew up. You guys were in the spotlight very suddenly. As a caregiver, what was that like for you?
At times, it just seemed very intrusive. Obviously, the media is insatiable with, do you have more video, more photos, more story, more? And so just a word on that Brittany made that video. Compassionate Choices hosted that on their website, crashed their site. Just because of the traffic that was drawn to Brittany's that video back then. And then, yes, the People magazine, their online story was the most clicked on story they'd ever had. And actually, I think it was a record that existed. So People was owned by Time Inc. It no longer is, but back then, with both properties, People or Time, it was Brittany's story was the most clicked story that they had ever had. And then from there, it was everywhere. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, USA Today. Her story was being covered all over the place. And it was shocking to her. She's like, Dan, what do I do with this? and she also asked the question, why me? And I'm like, Brittany, look in the mirror. You're an attractive 29-year-old, well-spoken individual. Are you kidding? The media is going to latch on to this. You are now the darling of this media cycle. And critically, and I've talked about this at different conferences when it applies to journalism, it's kind of sad, isn't it? Why does it take a 29-year-old for them to take interest in this? There are plenty, flip those numbers around. There are plenty of 92-year-olds that have died from a brain tumor and their dying process was tragic. Why weren't those covered? And I mean, really, take just for a second, a step deeper. into that is that a reflection on media, the industry of media, or is that a reflection on just kind of the broader society that like that's the only story we would be interested in?
Yeah.
But to Brittany's credit, her reasoning was, look, with the time that she has left, and if she feels healthy enough, that she'll lend her voice to this because it'll help move this cause forward, and it'll help everybody regardless of race, creed, gender, etc. But yes, here's this 29-year-old white female, higher socioeconomic, higher educated, and Brittany's like, well, this is an injustice for anybody in this predicament. And so if by her speaking up, the adage that a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, it was that Brittany, that this will be beneficial regardless of your socioeconomic status. If you're terminally ill in her predicament, then everybody would have this option. And so that was her reason for pursuing this. She wanted to affect change and get legislation passed. As far as the media attention for me, it was a bit of a distraction in a time where otherwise you just want it to be family time. But I knew that this was important for her. And, as far as her legacy, I read somewhere that the things you do for yourself are gone when you're gone. The things you do for other people, that is what lives on as your legacy. So Brittany's legacy is that in speaking up for this end of life option and the impact that her story had, it got people to recognize and talk about our collective mortality. Yes, eventually each and every one of us will die. And Brittany, again, her appearance, 29 years old, it made people recognize, wait a minute, this could be any one of us. This could be somebody's sister or their aunt or their cousin. And look at her, she's not an elderly individual. So we should be okay talking about this, and specifically the option of medical aid in dying. So in that regard, my role was I was supportive of Brittany, of whatever she felt like. She had the energy, the interviews that she gave, which was not many of them. The part that was frustrating, the time that I do want back, the time that both Brittany and I felt was stolen from us, was not the media stuff. It was the fact that we had to move from California up to Portland. So that part was the injustice. That's where, as Californians, why were we in Oregon just so that Brittany could experience a gentle death? So that would be, looking back, the part that to be angry about was that reality. Why the hell did we have to leave our home and move to another state? Brittany should have had this option here in California. And so, as I mentioned, that's why I keep working on this legislation across the country.
Did you ever have a moment where you thought, this was the wrong choice? I don't agree with this. I think it's not a good fit for us. Did you ever have a moment where you doubted that?
The media attention, or
no, the medical aid in dying choice?
Oh, no, not for a second, because in that regard, it's very simple for me. And this goes back to, again, those initial conversations, and even before Brittany had surgery, the way I looked at it through the lens of, and your podcast, well, if anybody goes on the internet, just put in Brittany Maynard brain tumor. There's going to be an image that shows up. And as soon as you see that image, it was very simple for me that I'm looking at that brain tumor on the screen. And the thought that I had was, holy shit, if that thing was inside of my skull, I would be doing the exact same thing. Again, it's simply knowing that you have the option. There's no requirement that you're going to utilize it. And I'll speak to that. One of the numbers that to me is the most compelling, and this holds true in all states, so we have passed this. I'll use Oregon's only because it's been in effect now for 25 years or however many years it's been there. But this holds true in every jurisdiction that we've passed it. More than a third of individuals who qualify for and receive the medication, more than a third do not end up using it. They die of their underlying disease without needing to take the medication. To me, that speaks to the power of this, that it's an option that the patient has, they've secured. Brittany's hope was that she would not need to use the medication. Her hope is that she would just die peacefully in her sleep one day. Well, unfortunately, the symptoms that she was having made it very clear that, that was not going to happen. Those symptoms were only getting worse. Every day is worse than the day before. And so that was her trajectory. So she had to choose the day to say, look, I've suffered enough and I'd prefer to pass away gently now, today, instead of pick a number. Do I live for another 2 weeks? Maybe. I'm only going to be suffering those days. I'm not going to be living that time. So for Brittany to navigate this the way that she did, in my mind, the answer to your question is not for a second that I ever think, oh no, this, Brittany shouldn't have this option, or this is something that I'm in any way second guessing. If anything, after seeing what she was enduring and experiencing, it just reinforced in me that this is an option a person should have, and it is an option that I would definitely want if I was in her shoes.
Dan, when it comes to how you have been in your grief journey since Brittany died, do you think your grief journey has been different somehow? I mean, you're obviously very public about your experience with Brittany, everything that you guys went through. But there are a lot of folks who are family members or, partners of people who have chosen to utilize medical aid in dying, and they don't feel comfortable talking about their grief, as if there's a stigma to it. There are even specialized grief groups for families whose loved ones have utilized MAID. Do you think, do you ever get any pushback in your grief journey? Do you ever feel like your grief is different or people view it differently?
I guess in that regard, you kind of touch on the answer that it's going to be different for everyone, that grief journey.
Sure.
It is a process. So early on, I think I mentioned Brittany died in November. We introduced legislation in California in January. So that was 2 months that went by. And then all of a sudden, this was once again very, very public. And because I was working on the legislation in California, there was all kinds of media attention, and I was giving interviews. And there would be moments during that where I would kind of reflect and think, some of this is not healthy for me. That I was just, because I had to take a leave of absence from work. Well, now I'm back at work. So I'm working 8, 9, 10-hour days at the office. And then I'd come home, open my computer, and start writing letters to senators in California to secure a meeting for the following week. And then I would literally take a vacation day from my employer in order to drive myself to Sacramento and spend the day talking with legislators. I'd get home, late at night and wasn't eating well. And so that side of it, I just viewed as, okay, this is not the healthiest thing. And even now, so Helen, thanks. Every time I share Brittany's story, there is a little bit of therapy in it for me. Because whoever the audience is, I figured that's another group of individuals that, well, now they remember her name. So, yeah, talking about her experience, her legacy, there is, I mean, the emotion just comes up. My voice will get shaky, etc. But I never view those things in a negative way. I'm talking about the person that I love, the person that I was married to, and sharing, her determination. She was a very loving and caring individual, but obviously determined and not somebody that would accept the status quo, especially when she felt that was a big injustice. So she was always fighting for the little guy. So my grief, I think her friends, that the relationship that the community that I established with her friends, who loved her fiercely, my family, my brothers, my parents, I think I was well supported in my grieving process, and continues to this day. So for me, it's been okay. I think I've gotten through this pretty well, and I can proudly represent everything that Brittany stood for and what she was advocating for. I understand what you're saying, though. At times, there might be individuals, a lot of times from a religious perspective, that, well, their loved one and they use medical aid in dying, and they're not quite sure how that fits in with their own spirituality and what that means. And I guess my advice would be, have conversations with the community that you find to help navigate through some of that. But in the end, and this is the one thing that I reminded myself, but I'll remind others as well. When there's only one person who's going through this, that's the patient. There is only one person navigating that. When you look at the scans of the image of the brain in her case, that's her brain that's up on that screen. It's not mine. I don't understand what the pain, the discomfort that she's feeling, emotionally, what she's going through, because obviously pain is so much more than just the physical side. There's the emotional and how that taxes your entire system. And so I guess I would encourage individuals to say, well, okay, however they are processing the fact that their loved one utilized medical aid in dying, I hope they get to a point where they recognize it's okay for them to have whatever those feelings are, maybe a little bit conflicted, but in the end, they come to the recognition that, yeah, but the only thing that really mattered in that case was the patient, and was that individual able to experience the death that they wanted? Well, then that's the right thing. Then that's the right way. And when any one of us gets to that point in our lives where we are dying, well, then we get to navigate it the way that we feel is right and that we feel is important for us. And hopefully then you have the support of the loved ones that you have around you. But I have learned that if anybody ever tells somebody else, oh, it's been 7 years now, it's been 10 years now, kind of encouraging a person to get past it, to get over it, that's horrible advice. Stay away from those people. If anybody ever suggests that, that's the wrong person to have around you, because they don't understand it. Yeah. And that process, that hopefully we all find our way to peace in memory of our loved one. I guess with Brittany, I do feel an enormous sense of pride because of the impact that she made. So maybe in that regard, all this attention that she received, it does fill me with pride. And that in some cases might make parts of this easier. I don't know.
Yeah. You've created great meeting. I mean, Brittany started it, right? She was willing to have the conversation. She was willing to do the interviews, and you're carrying that forward. That's really an incredible legacy for you to share with everyone across the United States. So Dan, a lot of folks don't know that when a patient is utilizing medical aid in dying, that hospice teams or hospice agency is still involved in the care. In fact, that's the criteria in most states, that there is a hospice agency involved in the care and supporting the patient as they do this. Was Brittany on hospice when she utilized MAID, when she took her meds?
She was. Although, so with her case, because we were researching every clinical trial, both here in the U.S. and internationally, we're looking at everything. In Brittany's case, we had had the conversation and interviewed hospice care facilities, but we didn't actually enroll her until we got much closer. She died November 1st, so we didn't enroll her until we were much closer to that date. It was only really in the last week or so. And the reason, and so here's kind of the way I'm answering this, is that she had her palliative care team. So her palliative care specialist, that physician, and there was, the therapist, the social worker, physical therapist. So in a sense, we had kind of created all those wonderful resources that hospice can provide, but without actually enrolling her into hospice. And I hope, and I think in some places this has changed, but that idea that technically from an insurance standpoint, if you're enrolled in hospice, then you're no longer seeking any sort of curative type. And so if you find something, then it's just, you just have to sign some paperwork to basically sign them out of hospice. And then you go pursue whatever that treatment option is, and insurance from a billing perspective, then they cover that. And then you can go back into hospice. That to me seems kind of ridiculous. It's like, no, allow the patient to be in hospice care and still pursue certain clinical trials without having to. But in her case, and again, because she's 29 years old and otherwise healthy, we felt that if something comes up and we need to hop on a plane we're going to Mayo Clinic or Duke or whatever cancer center, and we just wanted to be able to do that without like, what paperwork do we need? Bullshit. I don't. Yeah, we'll get to that when we come back. And so it's just the bureaucracy of it. So I'm probably getting into the weeds more than I need to, but I just want to share that her that medical team at the end. These are, well, when you're in hospice, you are essentially receiving palliative medicine. That is. Although if you are simply receiving palliative care, that does not necessarily mean that you are enrolled in hospice. You could be in a horrific car accident and have a palliative care team that is solely focused on making sure or trying to alleviate the suffering aspect or whatever ailments that the person might have, while the curative part of your medical team, they're putting together the surgeries to set bones or whatever that is. So those distinctions, the general public probably is not aware of. People who work in hospice are more familiar with that language. But I just, by way of answering your question, that her hospice / palliative care team, and in this case, I am lumping them together intentionally, they played a huge role in making sure that Brittany felt supported, cared for, listened to, as she was navigating those final few months up there when we were in Portland.
What I hear you saying is that Brittany designed her own good death. She knew what that definition meant to her, and you helped her do that. And we've talked about this on the podcast numerous times before. Nobody gets to decide what a good death is except for the person who's dying.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on the other end of the spectrum, and again, I've mentioned religion, or I alluded to it. I'm Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy, confirmation, all of it. And I have met people who, because of their Catholic or their religious beliefs, that they're opposed to medical aid in dying. That's fine. Curiously, nationwide support amongst Catholics is 70% of Catholics agree that a terminally ill individual should have this option. Church leadership is opposed. That's totally fine. That's their prerogative. the people who sit in the pews, many of them agree with Brittany. But the interactions that I've had with individuals who they say, oh, no, that they would want at end of life, whatever extraordinary measures can be taken, that they would want to be hooked, they would want artificial hydration and nutrition, that they maybe want to be hooked up to a ventilator if there's some hope that that might extend their life, that they would have the opportunity eventually to be removed from the ventilator and continue to live, etc. And to me, again, in line with what you just said, if that's what that patient wants, well, then that is the care that we provide that patient.
Right.
On the other end is an individual who, and I think this is the thing, that after hearing what a patient might endure or suffer and the treatment options that are available, most people kind of for themselves, they decide, okay, I'm willing to do this treatment, this thing, X, Y, and Z, but here's where I draw the line.
Yeah.
And past that, I'm not signing on for that 7th round of chemotherapy or whatever. I'm done. And so then you honor that. And to what you just said, a good death, to me, a good death, experiencing a good death is simply the extension of having lived a good life. And so whatever that is for that individual, that's what you honor. I think if more people were comfortable talking about end of life care, including hospice, and remove that silly notion that, oh, hospice, that's where a person goes when you've given up and you just go to die. It's like, well, no, Jimmy Carter was in hospice for like 2.5 years. Yeah, there's a model where it's supposed to be 6 months, and the fact that he kept living, my response to that is like, that's success. That keep going. So yes, whatever that individual deems as the dying experience that they would like, well, we honor that. And I think we owe that to one another.
I love it. So tell me what you're currently doing to advocate for medical aid in dying. Where are you focused right now?
Every year there's, I'd say, 6 or 7 states that are in play. So at the beginning of the legislative sessions, which is typically most legislative sessions start in January, February. So this year we have a few targets. New York, actually, I've been working on for a while. Boston, Delaware, Maryland this year, things were looking pretty good. It just boils down to there may be 1 or 2 senators on a given committee that, if they're like, we know we have the votes we need if we get it to the full chamber in the Senate or in the Assembly. But if there's a committee and the committee is comprised of, let's say there's 13 members, well, we need 7 votes to get through that committee hearing. And if we only have 6 votes, then that's it. We don't move in that state. So that's frustrating, because using Maryland as the example, support for medical aid in dying in Maryland is 72%. So here we have a case where you would expect 72% of the legislators, right, if they're representing their constituents, their districts, they'd be like, yeah, 72% are supportive, 72% of legislators should be on board. And yet you get to a small committee and it just takes a few legislators not representing their districts the way they should, and the bill doesn't move. But so I mentioned Massachusetts, New York, Delaware, Maryland, Illinois could be in the mix, and coming up, next year, Minnesota might be there as well. New Hampshire. So there's always states that I'm working on and active in. And then obviously there are certain states where, despite the fact that the citizenry of that state is supportive, and by numbers of 65, 70% or more in your state and Texas, I'm willing to bet that those are the numbers that we have. But unfortunately, the state elected officials there, they won't even give me a hearing. I won't even get a conversation with them, and they squash it. And it's a shame, because especially with an issue like this, that's not the way democracy should work. Again, if 70% of a given state, and in your state, I would say that the libertarian side definitely comes out, where libertarians saying that, wait a second, government is not going to tell me how I live my life. It's certainly not going to tell me how my final few days on this green earth might play out. And so many times I can peel away, conservative-minded or Republican-leaning legislators because of that libertarian streak that they have, that they're saying, this is just a matter of autonomy. I live my life, and at the end, I want to ensure my dying process is gentle. I want this option. So it is interesting how this plays out in different states.
Definitely. How can my listeners connect with you, find the work that you're doing, and stay in touch with you?
So there's one site that is linked with Compassionate Choices, but they can just put in the BrittanyFund.org, and Brittany being BRITTANY. So the BrittanyFund.org, and there's actually a link there on the top that says send a message to Brittany's husband. So that if they click on that, it will send me an email. And then there's also a Facebook page that I do keep for the legislative efforts and everything that I work on. Just updates on what's going on, and that is it's my name and Brittany's name just back to back. So if a person logs into Facebook, it's Dan Diaz Brittany Maynard is the page. If they just put that all in, no spaces, just put the whole thing in, and that'll take them to that page. I need to get more up to speed with Instagram, and I'm not great with the social media. So those two sites, I figure that's pretty good. They can go to either one of those two.
Yeah, awesome. Dan, I'm so moved by your story and the way you're carrying forward Brittany's mission and vision for what a good death should be, and that everybody should have that option. Thank you for taking time with me today to talk about it, and thank you for the work that you're continuing to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm glad to share, like I said, Brittany's story with another audience, because that's that many more individuals that know the name Brittany Maynard. That means a lot to me.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.